Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this November 16th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my shows every evening, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. So last Friday, we had a huge terrorist attack, ISIS claiming responsibility for. At this particular juncture, there have been between 120 and 150 killed at 3 different locations. I'm sure anyone listening to this show has followed that story, and I thought today we might discuss it a bit. Now, first of all, this type of terrorism is impossible to stop. You can't stop someone from walking into a crowded building, in a sense, with the intentions that these guys had, armed with AK-47s, etc., strapped with bombs, for what? The jihad, for the caliphate, for the overthrow of the Western Empire. Now, the real point here is, where does this terrorism come from? And I've said all along that it's orchestrated. That terrorism has been orchestrated. I could go back, we're going to go back all the way to the creation of Islam. But let's start with the French Revolution. Overwhelming evidence that the Jesuits, through the Freemasons, created that conflict. There's overwhelming evidence in a number of stories, including the American Revolution, stories that have been revised and changed, that the Vatican and Rome have been involved in the American Revolution, fomenting war. Now we move to Vietnam, World War II, World War I. All of these stories have factual evidence that will lead you to a conclusion, almost probable cause conclusion, that these guys are involved. Why don't we think they're involved today? Well, there have been some investigators out there working on this story, and I've tried to compile a number of things for you today so you can go look at it, get the facts, because you see, if you have a system of, for example, why terrorism now in the form of ISIS, in the form of this huge Muslim outcry? So I think you really have to go back first and look at how Islam was created, and also why it was created. And if so, now, I know when we get onto this story, Muslims take offense, because when I say that there's evidence that the Vatican in 700, who was firmly entrenched by then with enough reasons to do this, had a hand in penning the Quran for a reason, and that was to create conflict between the East and the West. Now, I know Muslims get upset at this because, let's say, those who believe strictly in the Quran believe it was written by one prophet, Muhammad. But think about this. When we speak about Christianity, the Vatican likes to lump itself into that category. And they then, if you want to look at what they tell you, are the largest Christian organization in the world. So when I say, first of all, that they are a pagan organization, I don't think Muslims can take an affront to what I'm going to say, because I grew up a Catholic. Now, we all know that Catholicism is not Christianity, but in the eyes of most it is. So how did this all begin? I think it's worthy to go back and look. The first time I ever heard that the Vatican had a hand in writing the Quran for a reason came from a former Jesuit priest who worked in the Vatican and got inside information. And he came forward. His name was Alberto Rivera. And he was told by Cardinal Bea, while he was at the Vatican, how the Vatican created Islam. Now, it came from him after his conversion to Protestant Christianity. And we all know his stories if you listen to my show about how he talked about how he was instructed to infiltrate certain Protestant churches in order to get them annex them into Catholicism in a sense. But the first time I heard about it was excerpted in what was called The Prophet, published by Chick Publications, Chino, California. And since its publication, after several unsuccessful attempts on his life, he died suddenly from food poisoning. His testimony, again, should not be silenced, I believe. Now, I've never got a chance to interview Alberto Rivera, but I did get a chance to interview his wife, Nuri Rivera, who still survives him and has a small Christian ministry in Florida. And the stories she told me about Alberto were harrowing, to say the least. She without question says he was killed by agents of the Jesuit order for leaking this information. Not only this, but other serious stuff. Secondly, they had come to her to bribe her with a lot of money, millions of dollars, if she would sign a statement saying that he was insane, or he was not of his right mind when he did this. She refused. Secondly, they tried to get information on where he was buried, which she refused to give him, and I asked why, and she said it is their practice to take people like him, who are their biggest enemies, bring their bones back to the Vatican, and in a sense worship them, or say, we have now got complete dominion over you, even in the afterlife. Now, here's a couple quotes from Alberto Rivera about the creation of Islam. Now, more importantly, you have to really understand that when you're dealing with deceptive people like this, they're never going to leave a perfect trail of what they did. They're not going to come out and say, yes, we wrote the Quran because we want to start war between Muslims and Christians. Now, this war between the Christians and Muslims was going strong back in the 700s because of this conflict between both spirituality, lifestyles, things like that. But before I listen to what, you listen to a couple quotes from Alberto Rivera, you have to understand that when you read the Quran, have you read the Quran? I've read most of it. And striking similarities to Catholicism. Now, I grew up in Catholicism, so I know it quite well. And some of the things you find, in fact, in the Quran, you find more references to Jesus than you do to Muhammad. In fact, there's some 25 references to Jesus. I think less references to Muhammad. And there's no mentions of his family or anything really in that Quran. If I'm incorrect, someone who's read it, let me know. But there's striking similarities in the way they worship, in the things, in fact, this worshiping of Mary, of the Queen of Heaven, which basically is not, there was no Queen of Heaven in the Bible. So what we're dealing with here, I'm saying, look, let's get to the truth about what happened. It's no criticism to your faith. Look, I had to go through this as a Catholic. I'm doing the same thing to 1 billion strong Catholics who call themselves Christians. So I'm not doing this strictly to denounce Islam. I'm just trying to say, where did this exactly come from? Because much of Catholicism was written by priests, and they consider it to be more important than what's in that little book in the Bible. So the real point is, when you start looking back, you start saying, it makes sense. Who benefited from this? In the end, the Vatican did, when you look at what happened back in the 700s when this was going on. These wars between to get the Holy Land, everything like that. And this is still going on to this very day, now in the form of ISIS. And I told you where ISIS comes from. How many shows have I done saying, please trace the name of ISIS, who she is. Now, she's a Greek goddess, or she's a Egyptian goddess. Now, the reason sometimes you say Greek, Rome, Egyptian, because all of them, for example, this goddess has different names in different countries, but it's the same worshiping. For example, ISIS, I believe from Egypt, basically was created this ISIS, ISIS created an obelisk. And the story of that is goes down in the mythology why she did that. And she was collecting the bones of her brother who were killed by one of her enemies, or yes, by one of her enemies, and he'd scattered the bones, scattered the body of Isis in 13 pieces, and she collected 12, and the penis was missing, so she created this obelisk. And now the creation was worshiping, back in Greek or in Egyptian mythology, she worshipped this symbol of Isis as a phallic symbol, and in that was born a god. Was born one of their pagan gods. Now what happens is the same symbol, Isis, the same symbol of the obelisk is used to symbolize St. Peter's Square. It's there in Washington, and it's there in London. And there's many all over the world if you start researching it. Why would this terrorist group be named ISIS? For example, let's just talk a little bit about this half hour about what Alberto Ribera said. I'm not going to dwell on the story of Islam back in the 700s. You can go back to some of my old shows, etc., etc. But he says, what I'm going to tell you is what I learned in secret briefings in the Vatican when I was a Jesuit priest. Under oath and induction, a Jesuit cardinal named Augustine Abbé showed us how desperately the Roman Catholics wanted Jerusalem at the end of the 3rd century, because of its religious history and its strategic location. In fact, they still wanted folks, and they bought the deed to the Temple Mount in 1992. They own it. The Vatican does. Because of its religious history and strategic location, the Holy City was considered a priceless treasure. A scheme had to be developed to make Jerusalem Roman Catholic. The great untapped source of manpower that could do this job was the children of Ishmael. The poor Arabs fell victim to one of the most clever plans ever devised by the powers of darkness. Early Christians went everywhere with the gospel, setting up small churches, but they met heavy opposition. Both the Jews and Roman government persecuted the believers in Christ to stop their spread. But the Jews rebelled against Rome, and in 70 A.D., Roman armies under General Titus smashed Jerusalem and destroyed the great Jewish temple, which was the heart of Jewish worship, in fulfillment of Christ's prophecy in Matthew 24:2. On this holy place today, where the temple once stood, the Dome of the Rock Mosque stands as Islam's second most holy place. Sweeping changes were in the wind. Corruption, apathy, greed, cruelty, perversion, and rebellion were eating at the Roman Empire, and it was ready to collapse. The persecution against Christians was useless as they continued to lay down their lives for the gospel of Christ. The only way that the powers of darkness could stop this thrust was to create a counterfeit Christian religion to destroy the work of God. The solution was in Rome. Their religion had come from ancient Babylon, Catholicism, right? And all it needed was a facelift. This didn't happen overnight, but began in the writings of the early church fathers. It was through their writings that a new religion would take shape. The statue of Jupiter in Rome was eventually called St. Peter, and the statue of Venus was changed to the Virgin Mary. The site chosen for its headquarters was on the 7 hills of the Vatican, the place where the diving serpent, where the satanic temple of Janus stood. The great counterfeit religion was Roman Catholicism, called Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots and abominations of the earth, Revelation 17:5. She was raised up to block the gospel, slaughter the believers in Christ, establish religions, create wars, and make the nations drunk with the wine of her fornication, as you shall see. 3 major religions have one thing in common. Each has a holy place where they look for guidance. Roman Catholicism looks to the Vatican. The Jews look to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, and the Muslims look to Mecca. Each group believes that they receive certain types of blessings for the rest of their lives for visiting their holy place. Now, one thing you have to understand is the Vatican is shrewd. When somebody starts talking like I do regarding, they created Islam, they realize that's going to incense Muslims. They believe that it's Christianity that is basically saying we are the only way to God, etc., etc. So the Vatican is quite shrewd in this. But let me point out something a little to them, and I'm sure they understand it, but let's point it out to you, is I am making the same argument, but showing that I show no favor to Roman Catholicism that calls itself Christianity, the majority being 1 billion strong, and I show no favor to the Muslims. So there's no question here I'm not being at all religiously racist. So take the Vatican strategy and throw it away at this point for me, because I just want to find out exactly what happened. And it's incensing that you have to go through history, all these classes you take in college and all this stuff, wasting your time with the revisionist history that the Jesuits have written. Now, in the beginning, Arab when they so they go to Mecca, Rome goes to the holy city, etc. In the beginning, Arab visitors would bring gifts to the house of God, and the keepers of the Kaaba were gracious to all who came. Some brought their idols, and not wanting to offend these people, their idols were placed inside the sanctuary. It is said that the Jews looked upon the Kaaba as outlying tabernacle of the Lord with veneration, and it became polluted with idols. In a tribal contention over the treasure of the Kaaba and the offerings that pilgrims had given were dumped down the well, and it was filled with sand. It disappeared. Many years later, Abd al-Mattub, Muttalib, was given visions telling him where to find the well and its treasure. He became the hero of Mecca, and he was destined to become the grandfather of Muhammad. Before this time, Augustine became the Bishop of North Africa and was effective in winning Arabs to Roman Catholicism, including whole tribes. It was among these Arab converts to Catholicism that the concept of looking for an Arab prophet developed. Here we go. Muhammad's father died from illness, and sons born to great Arab families in places like Mecca were sent in the desert to be suckled and weaned and spend some of their childhood with Bedouin tribes for training and to avoid the plagues in the cities. After his mother and grandfather also died, Muhammad was with his uncle when a Roman Catholic monk learned of his identity and said, "Take your brother's son back to his country and guard him against the Jews. For by God, if they see him and know of him, that which I know, they will constitute evil against him. Great things are in store for this brother's son of yours." The Roman Catholic monk had fanned the flames for future Jewish persecutions at the hands of the followers of Muhammad. The Vatican desperately wanted Jerusalem because of its religious significance, but was blocked by the Jews. Another problem was the true Christians in North Africa who preached the gospel. Roman Catholicism was growing in power, but would not tolerate opposition. Somehow the Vatican had to create a weapon to eliminate both the Jews and the true Christian believers who refused to accept Roman Catholicism. Looking to North Africa, they saw the multitudes of Arabs as a source of manpower to do their dirty work. So what are they doing here? They're thinking of strategizing in a way to pit these two groups that are blocking what they want. And if they could have them destroy each other, doesn't that open the door for them? They did similar things with the French and the British in the American Revolution, which we'll get into at another time. But as you can see, stories like this don't evolve in a day, don't evolve in a year. We're talking about a long period of time of planning, master planning. The Roman Catholic monk, then another problem was the true Christians preached that Roman Catholicism was growing in power. Somehow the Vatican had to create a weapon, like I said. They saw the Arab people as a source of manpower. Others were used in an underground spy network to carry out Rome's master plan to control the great number of multitudes of Arabs who rejected Catholicism. When St. Augustine appeared on the scene, he knew what was going on. His monastery served as a base to seek out and destroy Bible manuscripts owned by true Christians. The Vatican wanted to create a Messiah for the Arabs. Now, someone they could raise up as a great leader, a man with charisma whom they could train, and eventually unite all non-Catholic Arabs behind him. creating a mighty army that would ultimately capture Jerusalem for the Pope. In the Vatican briefing, Cardinal Bay told us this story. A wealthy Arabian lady who was a faithful follower of the Pope played a tremendous part in this drama. She was a widow named Kahija. She gave her wealth to the church and retired to a convent, but was given an assignment. She was to find a brilliant young man who could be used by the Vatican to create a new religion and become the Messiah for the children of Ishmael. Kahija had a cousin named Warqa, who was also very faithful Roman Catholic, and the Vatican placed him in a critical role as Muhammad's advisor. He had tremendous influence on Muhammad. Teachers were sent to young Muhammad, and he had intensive training. Muhammad studied the works of St. Augustine, which prepared him for his great calling. The Vatican had Catholic Arabs across North Africa spread the story of a great one who was about to rise up among the people and be the chosen one of God. While Muhammad was being prepared, he was told that his enemies were the Jews and that the only true Christians were Roman Catholic. You see what I'm getting at here? Even back then. Now, people are going to say, well, where does this stuff come from? How come it's never been seen? Well, did you ever go to the Vatican archives? They've been hoarding information for hundreds of years that you'll never see so that they can write revisionist history. So use your head. They're not going to give this stuff to you. Everybody says, well, you're the only one, or there's only a few people talking about it. It can't be true. That means it might be even closer to the truth than what you get from the masses. So, what happens while he was being prepared? He was taught that the others calling themselves Christians were actually wicked imposters and should be destroyed. You see, the Vatican could say back then, we are the true religion. These are Christians that are imposters that we want killed, and so they get somebody to do the killing. What do you think they're doing now? The same thing. The same exact thing is going on. And the story goes on, and there's paragraph after paragraph talking about how Rome became involved with Muhammad and how they, some of Muhammad's, what happened, Muhammad had claimed he had a vision from Allah. All of this stuff happened. And if you read what was given to him by certain intelligent monks and priests who were creating this holy book, you'll see that there's so much similarities to Catholicism that you have to ask these questions. And when you get some of the history that's missing regarding how Muhammad came to be and his connections to the Vatican, then you begin to wonder, what was their real purpose here? Now, you know as well as I do, the Vatican's purpose is not, when you really understand them, and I grew up a Catholic, is not to save souls and to be, they use that as a front, of course. But why wouldn't they do this back then? And the same thing is going on today. So that's why I'm bringing it up, because I am going to propose to you that this is where this terrorism is coming from. The same exact people who, throughout the course of history, have followed the same path of evil and are using Muslims again to wipe out their enemies. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, let me just mention a little more about this story of Muhammad and the creation of Islam and the Vatican's possible connections. Now, what happened after that, Muhammad was being prepared, okay, and he was close to Roman Catholics at the time. Now, Muhammad began receiving divine revelations, and his wife's Catholic cousin Waraqah helped interpret them. From this came some of the Quran. In the fifth year of Muhammad's mission, persecution came against his followers because they refused to worship the idols of Kaaba. Muhammad instructed some of them to flee to Abyssinia. The Roman Catholic king there accepted them because Muhammad's views on the Virgin Mary were so close to Roman Catholic doctrine. These Muslims received protection from Catholic kings. Muhammad later conquered Mecca and Kaaba and was cleared of idols. History proves that before Islam came into existence, the Sabaeans in Arabia worshipped the moon god, who was married to the sun god. They gave birth to 3 goddesses, who were worshipped throughout the Arab world as daughters of Allah. An idol excavated at Hazar in Palestine in the 1950s shows Allah sitting on a throne with the crescent moon on his chest. Muhammad claimed he had a vision from Allah and was told, "You are the messenger of Allah." This began his career as a prophet, and he received many messages. Where did they come from, I wonder? By the time Muhammad died, the religion of Islam was exploding. The nomadic tribes were joining forces in the name of Allah and this prophet Muhammad. Some of Muhammad's writings were placed in the Quran. Others were never, ever published. Some were written for him by others. Now, some of his words are in the hands of high-ranking holy men, ayatollahs, in the Islamic faith who have connections with the Vatican. When Cardinal Bea shared this with us, says Alberto Rivera, in the Vatican, he said these writings are guarded because they contain information that links the Vatican to the creation of Islam. Now you know why I wanted to get into the Vatican archives. Both sides have so much information on each other that if exposed, it could create such a scandal that it would be disastrous for both of them. So they both keep quiet. So, okay, we can move on and show the connections here between the Pope and Islam during this period of time. Muhammad, when the religion was created, etc., etc. But remember, as time went on, the power of Islam became tremendous. Jews and true Christians were slaughtered, and Jerusalem fell into their hands. Roman Catholics were never attacked, nor were their shrines during this time. But when the Pope asked for Jerusalem, He was surprised at their denial. So then we get into that whole big story, which we'll go into at another time. But here's the deal, okay? I think the Pope realized he created a monster out of his control, but he still has that control of certain aspects of Islam. And they still have the ability to create these terrorist organizations within, which I believe are created here. Just like they created when I was in Italy, through the Western powers of the CIA and the Vatican working together, they created the Brigata Rossa to test terrorism out on a smaller scale in Italy. I was there during that period of time. Now, let's look more closely at how this operates today. I say it operates in a similar manner. And let's go to a story I found here, if we could move forward quickly, and talk about this. Now, you say, Greg, that someone, a critic of mine, would say, Greg, you're just off base. How could the Jesuit priests do that today? It's not. It happened then, but maybe not now. Well, how about this? How about if ISIS is taking orders from Jesuits like Father Paolo Dall'Oglio, Father Paolo Dall'Oglio. Now, this story is incredible. It's an incredible story of how he began to get involved in Syria with ISIS. And here's a little bit of his story. He was born in 1954 as an Italian Jesuit priest and supposed peace activist. He was exiled from Syria by the government of Bashar Assad in 2012 for meeting with members of the opposition and criticizing the actions of the al-Assad regime during the Syrian civil war. He supposedly then, even though he was close to the rebels, kidnapped by them. He hasn't been seen since 2013. So, this priest, it's just an unbelievable story of how he, and again, was there fomenting ISIS, acting as a peace advocate, but yet doing much, much more. And there's someone that wrote, I'm going to go to this right now and give this to you. And somebody presented a nice little piece on this priest. And let me get it right now for you. Okay, let's see if I can find this. All right. So if we go to this priest and look at what he has been involved in, it's incredible. And I'm trying to pull it up. And I think I can here. No, I can't. Just bear with me a moment, because I want to do this the right way. And I can't seem to find what I wanted to find, but I will find it if you give me a second here. But what I'm getting at, maybe this is the one here. No, that's not it either. Let me entertain you, as they say. Okay, here's some proof. I'm back. Proof that this priest, Dall'Oglio, charmed ISIS into being. Father Dall'Oglio is an Italian priest, like I said, lived in Syria. He was called the priest of the revolution, enthusiastically condemning the Syrian government, calling on the United Nations and the West to intervene militarily in support of the Islamist rebels. Now, why would a priest be doing this anyway? But anyway, the story gets quite interesting as we'll move forward and look at this priest and see his connections with fomenting and maybe helping to fund ISIS. Dall'Oglio was expelled from the country in June 2012 after decades of monastic life in Syria for supporting Islamic rebels against the Syria government. Could he be a very important spy, someone creating this, helping create this terror organization, using our military, connecting with the CIA? Of course. 6 months after being expelled by the Syrian government in June 2012, Dall'Oglio was awarded the Peace Prize of the Italian region of Lombardy. It's usually the way it works. Guys who foment war, in public at the Peace Prize. Now, Bergoglio did not stop his Jesuit intrigue there. He frequently snuck back into Syria to help the rebels who formed ISIS. In April 2013, Bergoglio, international aides from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UK, and the US. He's getting aid from these people combined. I mean, it's incredible when you start looking at this guy. And there's always a few of these guys working in certain areas like this in the Jesuit order. And I say to you, isn't this cause for a bit of an alarm? But 3 months after ISIS was formed, the Jesuit media told us that Father Del Oglio, O-G-L-I-O, was kidnapped and executed on July 29, 2013 by his own baby, ISIS, in Syria. 19 days after an interview with Syria Deeply, telling the story of ISIS. Now, why would they do that? Now, the following are some excerpts from the interview of Paolo Del Oglio by SyriaDeeply.org on July 10th, 2013. He's disappeared. I don't think he's dead. I think he's in hiding somewhere. And SD Syria Deeply, you met with military extremists who opposed the Assad regime. Yes, the Syrian State News then accused me of being embedded with Islamist extremists and paid by Al-Qaeda. What the heck's this priest doing this anyway? Your mission has clearly expanded far beyond furthering Islamic Christian understanding, hasn't it, Father? He said, I'm fully engaged in Islamic Christian harmony building. Of course you are, Father, sure. But today I'm also in the service of Islamic harmony building. We want next Ramadan to be a time for prayer and action for the reconciliation between the Sunnis and the Shiites. What a liar. Are the types of causes you've taken typical of a Jesuit? Good question. He says this, the Jesuits are an order of priests committed to the service of the gospel and souls, but not in an artificial way. We are very much engaging and compromising in the society by fighting for justice, for community development and human development, and for the interreligious dialogue and the harmony building. Such has been my commitment. And in this, I'm a Jesuit. You were exiled soon after the massacre of Hula. Was that a turning point in the conflict for you? He says, yes, in the sense that it was the moment when my calls to the international community to act in a nonviolent way to protect the freedom of the Syrian people in their pacifist protest ended in failure. Where the international community was unable to act, the regime chose to use more and more violent repression until it reached the point of massacre. See, they're pitting at that point you decided a violent response to this repression was justified. The moment came when I said people have the right to, here he goes, the right to defend themselves. The soldiers that have left the army so that they won't be forced to shoot their own people. They have the right and the duty to protect the people. And when a democratic civil society is pleading not to be destroyed by the violent repression and torture, the international community should help. So it goes. Then, as usual, Jesuits who control the media putting the blame squarely on Israel and the U.S. for all the ISIS bloodshed. Okay? The conflict is growing. Where's the money coming from to arm these people? One, a Jesuit is a member. We're going to remind you of the Saint Ignatius Loyola in 1534 and devoted to missionary and educational work. This is what they say. But one given to intrigue as well. And as we move forward with this story, we find that another Jesuit right involved in the same type of stuff that we talk about all the time. And interesting that he's no longer on the scene, but ISIS is moving in every direction. Now, one of the most important things about ISIS came to me when you started to talk about what is this caliphate? What are they really doing? Have they given us a strategy? And they have. Has Rome given us a strategy? That's what I say. Because just remember back to the story that I was telling you about Muhammad and how the Catholic kings were protecting them. Look at what the 5-year plan now of the caliphate is. And I'm going to play a 5-minute video that explains it pretty well. Here you go. And you're going to see that Rome is protected. Now I'm going to go back and start it again. And you're going to...
that used to go by the name of ISIL is trying to change its name to flat out the Islamic State, as you can see right here. And with that said, they have released a 5-year plan. They plan to carve out this caliphate all the way from Spain to China.
Okay, now this is ISIS's 5-year plan that they've made public. They give you a map. They tell you what their strategy is. Now, one of the things you have to hear, the mainstream media lately is saying that ISIS is losing territory in these areas. I don't believe that, but that's what they tell us. They're losing territory that they've held, and they're spreading out into the world doing these type of terrorist attacks like they've done in Paris. But let's listen to their plan. This guy put together, his name is DAHBOO77. He put together this video 6 minutes long on this plan, which is worth listening to.
Now, it's unclear if ISIS includes parts of China in their caliphate, but Western China is home to millions of Muslims. And knowing what we know, who's backing them, who's training them and supporting them all the way, and for those of you who have not been paying attention, they've trained them in Jordan, they've trained them in Turkey, and they have launched from both places. They have pounded out Syria. They have taken over the whole northern part and declared it the capital of this caliphate. They have stormed down into Baghdad, took it over, took all their weapons back up into Syria to the capital of this caliphate. And now, as you can see, at some point here, they've released their plans, a 5-year plan to take over all of this land, half of Africa. I mean, you can see it. Spain, all of these regions. If there's one thing that I want to point out here, to everyone out there that has the eye to see, this is the most important. You ask me who's running the world, you ask me who the puppet man, I try to tell people all the time, I've been telling you this whole time. This comes down from the Jesuit command. Okay? They played both sides of all these wars. They did the same thing in the Ukraine. They backed the Nazi Maidan soldiers. They were shooting both the police and the protesters. We busted them there. It's the same old song and dance everywhere you go. They are trying to play off both sides. That way they have full control in the situation. Now they've already destabilized Libya. They've already destabilized Egypt. And if you've not noticed it by now, if you look at the map right before your very eyes, you can see, and it should be a big red flag to all of you, there's one big chunk of land that they missed. Why would they not target Italy? Why would they just say, oh, the heck with it, go all the way around it the other way? Really? I can tell you why. Because that's central command. If you cannot see it now in black and white right in front of your own face, by their own plans, by design, this is what they want, this is what they're going after, and they're going to go right around Rome. You're telling me they don't see Rome as an enemy? How is that? I'll tell you how. Because that's who created them. Maybe now, if you have the eyes to see, you can see who is running this whole thing. It's in black and white, right in front of you. You want to look at Israel, people want to say Zionist Jews, this and that. You see the Pope go in there and trying to make this peaceful arrangement. This whole thing is being played out on their terms here, piece by piece, and it's all by chaos. That is their motto. And in the end, it's genocide in every single state. So, I've said it before, Boko Haram in Africa, they're under the same umbrella, and they'll gladly join these units. And especially when they're being given free APCs, Humvees, all kinds of machinery, ammunition, guns, you name it, all the training, they're being taken care of. All you got to do is go out and kill whoever they say. And these young guys know nothing about this religion, about true jihad. Some of the highest ranking Muslims out there coming out of Jordan have stated this, that they don't want them, even if they're aligned with them, doing anything in Jordan, because it's just going to make them all look bad, like they're all terrorists. So they see the separation. Even these other groups out here that do not like the king of Jordan, that are against him, they're like, well, we're still not aligning with ISIS. They're smart enough. They see it. They see that they're controlled. And that's key, because if they were not, they would join right with them, and they could overthrow Jordan, and the same thing would happen. So it's all in the playbooks. This is what they're going to plan to do. Jordan, Turkey, you name it. From this is how they're going to see it. From the African coast all the way to the border of China. And the big gap, the big hole in the middle that they leave out, Rome. Now you know. It's been Dabu 7.
Now to end the show, let me play something here, a 4-minute tape from Western Journalism. That's that's his channel, and it's a little bit about how the American government is connected to this Islamic caliphate.
Like Fast and Furious, the IRS scandal, the VA scandal, and virtually every other issue that has plagued the Obama administration, Obama supposedly found out about the Al-Qaeda offshoot, ISIS, marching across the Middle East towards the U.S. Embassy in Iraq by watching the news. A 40,000-man army of black-robed men waving the Al-Qaeda flag and AK-47s crossing the Iraqi desert seemed to escape Obama's notice. Hard to believe. The other anomaly, where did ISIS, now referring to itself as the Islamic State, get not only tens of thousands of AK-47s, but advanced weapons like shoulder-fired heat-seeking missiles? Shockingly, from the Obama administration. According to Kenneth R. Timmerman's just-published book, Dark Forces, Obama's right-hand man, John Brennan, the head of the CIA, has been gorging jihadist groups with weapons, including heat-seeking missiles, for years. One of these heat-seeking missiles more than likely was used to shoot down the decrepit CH-47 helicopter, Extortion 17, packed with 30 Special Ops forces in Afghanistan on August 6, 2011. This is more than likely the reason for the massive cover-up, including hiding away the helicopter's black box, which would reveal exactly what happened.
Black box got blown away by the flood. In Afghanistan? Come on. Can't find the black box, which is really orange? I looked it up in Google. Them black boxes don't go away. They lose black boxes in the swamps in Florida, and they find them. You're going to tell me you can't find the black box? Not acceptable. So he says it's an RPG, a lucky shot. Are we playing basketball, hockey? Is he out of his mind? There's nothing lucky here. All our sons are dead. You know? I raised my hand. I said, General Cole, could it have been a missile? Heat-seeking missile, right? And there's no coincidence that Doherty and Woods might have found some heat-seeking missiles.
But why exactly is Obama arming Al-Qaeda, arming the Islamic State, whose proclaimed caliphate is expanding day by day, whose borders may soon reach the United States? The only answer, as shocking as it sounds, is that Obama is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, the puppeteers behind the push for a worldwide caliphate. The evidence? Obama has at least 6 Muslim Brotherhood members inside his administration, including the head of the Department of Homeland Security Council, Mohammed El-Biari, who openly supports the newly formed caliphate. Obama-backed Muslim Brotherhood member Mohammed Morsi in Egypt, in which the Brotherhood's own founding documents call for the destruction of the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house. Is in fact Barack Hussein Obama, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, backing the Islamic State, committed to placing America under the control of a worldwide Islamic caliphate?
Well, that's a question that I'll leave you to answer. We're all out of time on the Investigative Journal, and I'll be back with more on this story tomorrow. See you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.